feels almost unthinkable nowadays, but once upon a time, Link was a little buddy-buddy with our favorite fish folk. While they might very well currently be the most prominent of all races in Hyrule, with Sidon arguably being among the most recognizable faces in the entire Zelda series, the Zora originally debuted as enemies, a role they basically lost overnight after Ocarina of Time turned them into a peaceful race. But how about we turn the clock back several decades and look at how the Zora transitioned from enemies to allies. We begin with the original Legend of Zelda on NES. Because yeah, the Zora may have hostile origins, unlike other races like the Goron and the Rito, but they have also been around a lot longer. While all other races had to wait until Ocarina of Time at least before they'd make their debut, the Zora had already appeared in 4 games at that point. That said, had Nintendo not decided to retain the name, we might have very well never considered the original enemies and later race to be the same thing, because design-wise they really aren't all that similar. While the appearance of the Zora race has changed throughout the course of the series, they have always been depicted as a crossover between humans and fish, with humanoid body types but fish-like features like gills, fins and tails. The Zora enemies are much more reptilian or frog-like in their design, and barely resemble humans to begin with. And yet, this was their original look, ever since the original Legend of Zelda. That said, the manual does describe the Zora as half fish, half woman, which is something I don't recognize in either their sprite or their artwork if I'm being honest. In this game, Zoras attack by spitting water and are relatively easily defeated, although they can heal themselves by diving under the surface. What is also noteworthy and a furthermore unremarkable debut is that Zoras live around Death Mountain in this version of Hyrule, which is a location they have never occupied since. Zelda II is in many ways a bizarre game that is a true outlier within the Zelda series, and the behavior of the Zora here underlines that perfectly. While several individuals can be found in rivers in this game, most Zora are found in caves, deserts and plenty other non-watery locations. They have also never been more unhuman-like than here, as they don't even walk on their hind legs, but instead on all fours. While their artwork is surprisingly enough more of a cross between a human and a fish, their sprite and in-game appearance makes them look more monstrous than ever before or after. Spitting water remains their MO when Link approaches, although they are significantly stronger in Zelda II than in its predecessor. While Ocarina of Time and the changes it brought to the Zora are still quite some years away, the next game in the series, A Link to the Past, made the first steps towards redeeming the Zora. In this game, it is established that the Zora aren't just a sentient race with their own society and culture, they were also once aligned with the Hylians. However, following the Imprisoning War, their relationship soured and most Zoras now dislike Hylians, to the point they'll attack Link if they spot him. While that means their familiar behavior of living around water and spitting at the hero returns, it is evident that by this point Nintendo had decided that the Zora were going to be more than just your average enemy. They introduced Whirlpool Waterways, a magic transportation system used to travel between Hyrule's waters, which is only accessible to the Zora and those wearing Zora flippers. Because yes, the Zora are living proof that money fixes everything. Their own king, who you would imagine is the leading figure in their dislike for Hylians, actually has no problem selling flippers to non-Zoras, Hylians like Link included. He is the first ever non-enemy Zora character in the history of the series, which is all the more remarkable considering most Zora in A Link to the Past are still straight up enemies. Due to their larger role, the Zora also appear in more artwork for this game. Their official art as an enemy is still very monstrous, but this artwork of Link meeting King Zora already begins to show them in a slightly better light, I guess. I mean, it's still a somewhat uncanny image, but compared to the monstrosities they've been depicted as before, I guess it's an improvement. Despite Link's Awakening not being set in Hyrule, the Zoras would keep up their appearance streak for his title and return once more. They're mostly found around Marvis Bay and the rivers of Koholint, once again attacking with their familiar spit attack. This game does not feature any lore or explanation as to why the Zora attack Link, presumably throwing their development back to the early days on the NES. There is however one exception. One sole Zora who doesn't want any trouble and is just trying to live his best life in Animal Village. He's well hidden and can only be spotted using the magnifying glass, although it is never explained how this Zora was able to somehow make himself invisible to the naked eye. After he essentially buys Link's silence, a photographer snaps a quick picture of Link and the Zora, and that about wraps up the only real interaction we have with the Zoras in Link's Awakening. Seeing as this was the final game released before Ocarina of Time turned the Zora into a predominantly peaceful species, you would think this would be the last title to feature them as enemies, but that isn't actually the case. In fact, the literal next games in the series to feature them, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, went right back to making the Zora enemies instead of allies. Although, like we've seen starting with A Link to the Past, we have now entered the era where, while Zoras can appear hostile, there is always a but involved. And Capcom came up with a really great explanation for the inconsistencies in Zora behavior, so good in fact that they have become a pretty core part of the series canon. While both Holodrum and Labrynna both feature Zoras as enemies, only Labrynna also houses friendly Zora. It is explained that the key difference between the two is in where they reside. The River Zora are more hostile, described as savages and retain the old reptilian look, while the Sea Zora resemble the Ocarina of Time design and are completely cool with Hylians. This explanation for their differences has remained factual up until this very day, with Echoes of Wisdom further establishing it as the truth after becoming only the second game in the entire series to feature both designs of Zoras in one game, although the River Zora aren't hostile here. What is interesting though is that even though it's fair to assume this is Zelda canon at this point, the River and Sea Zora split has never actually appeared in a game developed by the core Zelda team, although they of course wouldn't permit their inclusion in Echoes of Wisdom if they considered it unwanted information. Despite, or perhaps because of this new bit of Zora lore, River Zora continue to appear as enemies in some titles that followed, although their more recognizable sea-based cousins would start to hog the spotlight more and more. Four Swords Adventures takes after titles like A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, mostly featuring the Zora as the familiar enemies, while also introducing one Zora that isn't like the others and is kind to the Links, asking them for their help in keeping him fed. The final game to predominantly feature the Zora as enemies, at the moment of writing at least, is A Link Between Worlds, which really takes Zora in a direction we've never seen before or since. So, seeing as this is a spiritual successor to A Link to the Past, hostile Zoras can be found all over Hyrule, but there is also a community of friendly Zora to be found in Zora's domain, which for the only time in series history is populated by the green reptilian River Zora. It's explained that the queen of the Zora, Oren, didn't manage to keep the Zora unified, leading to the hostile rebellion of several members of the species, which are the Zora that attack Link. What is interesting from a design perspective here is that Queen Oren becomes the first and only River Zora to feature a humanoid body, as commonly seen in the Sea Zora. Even her underlings, or the River Zora of Echoes of Wisdom, don't have that, so it's quite a remarkable design decision. But it also shows better than anything that while there are canonically two types of Zora, there are really three from a meta standpoint. The Sea Zora, humanoid in their design, kind in their ways, the River Zora, reptilian in their design, kind in their ways, and the enemy Zora, reptilian in their design and hostile towards Link. And that last category, I think it's safe to say it has died out. While Echoes of Wisdom and A Link Between Worlds do still feature River Zora, which are rare enough as is, the design philosophy behind them is clearly one of establishing them as a race, instead of a hostile enemy species like Bokoblins or Lizalfos. A Link Between Worlds didn't go all out with that, possibly to remain faithful towards what A Link to the Past did with the Zora, but I think the way they are portrayed in Echoes of Wisdom is what the future of the River Zora looks like. And that means that I have some bad news for all you Sidon lovers out there. I don't think the Zora will ever spit in your face again. But hey, that's just what I think. How do you feel about the Zora as enemies? Would you like to see them return, or are you happy we've moved on? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Zelda content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.